Welcome back to our show. I'm Alexa, your netball bestie, and together with Jenna, this is Your Netball Besties. This is where we deep dive into SSN game analysis and what the netball world is currently talking about. Well, what an incredible preliminary final between the Vixens and Swifts in what ultimately was a one-goal victory to the Vixens, surrounded by a Swifts home crowd. It was an absolute insane game, and we can't wait to deep dive into it all with you. We also want to chat about a very interesting comment that Helen Housby made after the game that has absolutely set online speculation on fire. We had huge news from Netball New Zealand about Silver Fern's eligibility and what that means for the future of SSN, with potentially more imports joining the comp for 2026. We're also going to discuss the elephant in the room, which is, should SSN have a cap on imports? But first, let's get straight into the game, which was the preliminary finals. Jenna, what were your overall thoughts on this game?
Yeah, I definitely thought going into this game, I found it hard to sort of see who I would have tipped to have won because I thought Vixens and Swifts have been very similar in this sort of season in the way that they've been playing. So I definitely thought it was going to be a matter of who turned up on the day. While watching the game, I think you would have thought Swifts would have had that in the bag by about third quarter time going into it. And I think maybe they did as well. And that led to a bit of a shock upset very quickly when the Vixens sort of snatched that win back.
So in the first quarter, the Vixens actually won this 15-12. So the Vixens definitely had a strong start, but the Swifts were not far behind. And for me, what stood out the most was the Swifts' defense all the way down the court. And you could see that this was just building and building because there were, I think maybe six very, very close to held balls by the Vixens, which eventually did end up becoming a held ball by the Vixens and a turnover for the Swifts. And this was just credit to that building pressure that the Swifts had created all the way down the court. Huge credit to them for that. I really loved seeing the matchup between Paige and Maloney. And it was funny because they kept cutting to Stacey Marinkovic in the crowd. And it just felt like this was basically them fighting out for their starting bib for Diamonds around the corner. And in the second quarter, we really saw the Swifts absolutely smothering that middle channel and forcing the Vixens wide, which was definitely having the desired effect. I thought that Rudy was a great matchup against Grace. She was doing such a good job at putting doubt in the feeders' minds after already getting a few touches on the ball. And then that pressure by the Vixens defense was actually causing a few of those feeds to not be strong enough and not be accurate enough and straight into Rudy's hands. Shani Lambton was another standout in this game. There were a few moments there where it really just felt like Zara Walters, although an incredible player, just wasn't strong enough on the body, and Lambton was really winning that battle, particularly on the circle edge where Lambton got that beautiful intercept on the circle edge. Wouldn't have happened had Zara been a bit stronger on the body to, I guess, claim that position on the circle edge. Tara Watson making her debut for a preliminary final. What a fantastic addition to the Vixens bench. And the commentators actually said that Tara Watson specifically also can play centre and wing defence. So in the second quarter, the Swifts started taking a lead. This is when we actually had 7 in a row by the Swifts at one point. Interestingly, there were no super shots until the final minutes of the second quarter, which is something that I think later will come to haunt the Swifts, seeing on how this game ended up, because although they did eventually get a lead in the third quarter, I think they could have pushed for more.
Yeah, I definitely think we saw a bit of a shaky start from both sides, but then they sort of recovered towards the end of that first quarter. I think Swifts did show you really saw the step up in defense for them towards in that second quarter, which was really good to see. And yeah, I do agree. Paige didn't look 100% either. I think there was times where she looked like she was getting quite bothered. But I guess when you're in playing a prelim and you've got a grand final on the line, you're going to push through it, aren't you? But I definitely think as well in that quarter as well, Sarah Clark did a really good job to get the better of Garvin. She had really, had Garvin a bit rattled, had her pushed right up against that baseline, which was working really well. And we actually saw a very heavily penalized Vixen side this game too, significantly, which you wouldn't have expected considering notoriously Swifts are quite heavily penalised. I think Swifts did well in getting that lead. There's still that hesitation from them that we've seen for weeks now, where they are just not getting to circle edge. They're just desperate to sort of flog that long bomb into Grace, and a lot of the time there wasn't enough on that bowl, and it was easy pickings for Rudy Ellis. We even saw Bryony Akel a couple times throughout this game call a timeout and say one extra pass and get to circle edge. And I think there was one timeout in particular that they literally came out of the timeout, and then Grace White did a long bomb right in the circle. And I'm like, why are we not listening? Like, it felt like had they actually taken a moment to listen and apply what Bryony was saying, I think it possibly could have been a different outcome.
And obviously, we went into this third quarter having no idea how things were going to go. We had the Swifts defense absolutely just, if we thought they were good in the second quarter, my God, did they come hard in the third. So the Vixens attack was forced to reset multiple times. You could see Maloney doing a lot of that heavy lifting. We saw Garber not being sighted. She was demanding the ball. She was actually holding Clow high. She was opening up space, but she wasn't being sighted because of that incredible work by the unit of defense from the Swifts that were just confusing the space so well. At this point, we saw Zara come back on and Tara Watson back on the bench. I thought this was a very well-timed change because, yes, Tara Watson was doing a great job for her debut game. Zara is a phenomenal wing attack, and I think I was waiting for her to have her opportunity back on the court. I was saying during the live chat that I had that I really wanted to see her back on because I think that in regards to game time, she's earned this. She's consistently performed well, and she just needed a little bit of direction from the coaching team and then to come back on and have another crack at it, which we saw her do, and we saw her do very well. When we were seeing that stagnation in the Vixens attacking end, it was very similar to what we see in the Lightning attacking end. And like, I felt like the Liz Watson and Maloney combo is honestly so magic, and it's what both of those teams are missing. Because whereas Maloney was constantly coming forward and being an option, we saw no one else doing that for her. And we see Liz having to do almost the exact same thing for Lightning. At this point, like you said, Jenna, the penalties were really, really adding up. They brought it up on the screen and it was 44-19 penalties against Vixens. 44, that's huge. By the time the super shot period came in this quarter, I was desperate to see Lily Graham. Lily did sink a couple of super shots in this period, but I think that the biggest shot for me, and I went back and rewatched it this morning, was there was a contact on Lily in the shooting circle while Austin had ball in hand to take the super shot. This was the exact same scenario, almost the exact same positioning as what happened in the previous game for Vixens, where Lily was called for a contact and then the shot was called as no goal. So I don't know what she was called for. In my opinion, she did nothing wrong. She actually just set up her body as an additional screen, which we've seen shooters do a million times every game. Then, of course, we went into the fourth quarter and the Vixens were 10 goals down.
I thought Swifts continued to start the fourth quarter well. We saw Grace was getting double teamed a lot more by Joe and Rudy, but she was a lot stronger on the take, which was making the difference. But as the quarter played out, we just saw Swifts just losing too much of their own ball.
I think you'll agree, Jenna, that Vixens have historically been one of those teams that come back hard in the final quarter, even though they have a huge deficit. Austin started sinking super shots, and thank God, because at this point I was screaming at the TV for Lily Graham to come on, and I was stressed that they hadn't brought her on. The Vixens are normally the 1 point dominant team, and Swifts are usually the 2 point dominant team, and we had a complete role reversal here.
I don't even think Helen was even trying to position herself for a super shot, though. That was the difference. Is they were very happy to go for the one, but Helen wasn't even, she was just standing there letting herself be held back. Like, she wasn't trying to get the twos like we've seen previously. Dying seconds of the game, I can't understand the thought process in passing off the ball. Why would you not go away for that one? You've been going for the 1 point pretty much that whole quarter. why in that dying moments you could tell Helen wasn't expecting that ball, and then she's gone and taken it, and what would have she would have normally sunk, she's off balance, took a shot and missed, and that's done.
Oh, and I feel so bad for Grace Wecky in this moment because you just know that the weight of the world is going to feel like it's on her shoulders at the moment. Had the ball under the post with seconds on the clock. The Vixens had very, very smartly used up the time in that final minute. Seconds on the clock. Was Grace aware of this? I don't know because she played as if she wasn't aware of the clock. Because instead of taking the goal where she was right under the post, so literally what she'd been doing the entire game, she passed to Helen, who had also gotten herself into the one point space, not the 2 point space. And then what was interesting is what Grace did after that. So Grace actually drove out to be in the super shot zone, which I was so confused by. Was she going there because she wanted Helen to pass her the ball so then she could take a super shot? Or was she trying to draw the defenders out so then Helen could take the one? But then if that had been your plan, why wouldn't you just take the one? Like I was very confused.
But I think as well, I think the game was lost for them at different moments in that last quarter as well. I mean, it's easy to pinpoint that was the last ditch attempt essentially that was going to send them into overtime and sort of keep them within reach of potentially getting a place in that final. But they, at the end of the day, the team collectively did concede a 10-goal deficit going into that. And I think maybe they just got a bit too complacent and maybe they thought, we've got it. Don't even stress. Keep for the ones. But I've rewatched that last minute so many times and I just can't understand the thought process. And I think this also goes to show how important it is to have such a strong connection between your goal shooter and your goal attack, because I know that it was actually pointed out a lot online, and it wasn't until I saw it pointed out that I sort of went, oh, okay, I can see that, was that a lot of people were saying that that moment was the moment they sort of realized that Helen and Grace just don't seem to have that just, immediate natural connection. And that's not saying that that's not something that they're not going to ever get, but that's something that might need a bit more time to develop and be a big focus. But I would agree. I think you could just tell there was just no, yeah, it was just the connection wasn't there. So yeah, I definitely think that's going to be something they're going to need to focus on.
I guess I'm wondering how Houseby feels in a lot of this because she's kind of been under a lot of criticism and magnifying glass in regards to this whole season, whether they're doing well or not, in regards to when they were doing well and she's playing more of a WA role, or when they weren't doing well and why isn't she, why is she still playing that predominantly WA role? And I can see from her perspective, if I was her, I would be very confused as to what my role is anymore, because her role used to be so clear, so clean cut. She was the GA, she assisted with goals, she drove into the circle, she was that 2 point shooter, and she was also a real leader in that circle. Whereas now the game plan has seemed to focus and circle around Grace. And so Helen has turned essentially into an assisting feeder role.
So, I mean, I hope as well, Grace has had a tough season this year. And like we've said so many times, she wanted to be challenged. She openly said she wasn't challenging ANZ. And I think if she is able to play on, I think it will be better for her in the long run, because that is how she becomes the best player that she can be. But I would really love to see her, get up and over it, because it would have been a mental thing, because it's also hard being a shooter. You have a lot of pressure on your hands. You're the one making sure that ball goes in. So I'm sure, Grace and Helen probably walked off that court thinking, oh my God, I can't believe, so my heart goes out to Swifts, but I think Vixens just did the basics right. And that's essentially what got them there in the end. And that's sort of what we've been seeing in their past few games is they've just been nailing the basics right and chipping away, and that's just been enough. So I'm actually really curious now to see how the grand final will go, now that we know that Vixens will have a home ground advantage, and just see what they can bring to Fever. But that also being said, I think Swifts and Vixens are so similar. The performance both of those teams put out yesterday, had either of those teams taken that performance to Fever, I don't think they would have stood a chance, because of the way that Fever are playing so dominant right now. So I'm very curious to see what Vixen's plan of attack will be for the grand final now?
I got asked a lot who I was going for, and I didn't really feel like I had much skin in this game, so it was more just I think I wanted the Vixens to win purely because we've just seen Fever annihilate Swifts, and from a viewer perspective, it wasn't very entertaining. So I guess in regards to wanting a more tightly contested grand final that we can really sink our teeth into, yeah, I wanted it to be the Vixens, and also obviously being in Melbourne and their home crowd. I guess my fear was also, if the Swifts did win, would we not have a sellout crowd? Both sides having to rely on fans buying plane tickets to come in to see the game.
Well, you'd be happy to know it's like majority sold out. So I don't think it
Oh,
was ever going to
good.
be I don't think a sellout was ever going to be a question. There were a few tickets that did go up for sale after that game by some fans. But I mean, hey, if you're crazy like us and you bought your tickets back in May,
We were going to go no matter what. So,
we were going to go no matter what. But we can't complain about who's in there now. I do think Vixens and Fever will definitely be a more exciting match up because, you want close games. And because, from the highs are highs and lows are lows, can be a hard loss or it can be a very incredible win. And I mean, that's what sport's all about, isn't it?
so nice for Simone McInnes to finish up with the Vixens. Like, the girls really did this. Like, they really fought for her when she, had her hand forced to make that announcement publicly about her stepping down as head coach at a time when the Vixens weren't performing. That would have been excruciating. Like, what a hard thing to have to go through. And then look at them now. They are in the grand final.
Oh, definitely. But I feel like as well, going into this for the Vixens is they have the upper hand in the sense that they are playing with nothing to lose now. So I think that they will probably give it to the Fever, which will be exciting to see.
So excited. Oh, not much longer, only a few more sleeps.
I know, not long at all.
Speaking of the game, obviously, that we just watched, there was a very interesting comment by Helen Housby in her post-game interview. I'm going to paraphrase here, but generally along the lines of this is the last time the team will play together as the existing unit, essentially, which obviously sent the, social media into a tailspin. I can understand why this is something that people will read into, even though it might mean nothing. From someone who is so media trained and has done this for years, I find it surprising for her to say something with so much potential to be read into, like so openly.
I think people are reading into it too much. I think she just lost out on a chance at the grand final. You'd be feeling awful. They've shoved a camera and a microphone in her face and said, like, comment, tell me where it went wrong. And you're like, oh, stunned trying to. I think she probably just meant as like this year's contracted team because as we know, Maddie Proud's been out on maternity leave. There are a couple players that are off contract. I think Swifts is actually probably going to be one of the sides that will retain majority of their people. I think people are reading too much into it, and that's just something a lot of people seem to do online is they read too much into things. I've heard so many and I've seen so many, and then a lot of the time it's going back and being like, no, actually, this is what this means. And then they're like, oh.
I guess time will tell because we've obviously got the signing period just around the corner. Is that right?
Yes, opens a day after the grand final.
And I think that's going to be, yeah, definitely a little bit of mayhem. I think we're going to see a lot of changes. And of course, that leads us into the next talking point, which is, of course, we had the huge news come out from Netball New Zealand, which was in regards to the eligibility around silver ferns, and they have decided to change it. Now, we know a huge person to thank for that is Grace Weke, with the huge risk that she took coming to SSN this year.
Grace may have been the driving force, but that wasn't the reason they changed it. Because, as you said, the competition is hanging on by a thread and there's a lot of uncertainty around what it will even look like next year. That's actually what's been the push because they've realized we are losing money. We're not even sure how many games we'll have next year, how many teams, if there's cuts. We heard in the Netty Life podcast last week, Danelle Wallum let slip that there would be a significant pay cut for players. Players can't live off of that. So, of course, they're going to go overseas. So, of course, the push to make that eligibility rule came from the reason that they may not even have a competition next year. So that's, I think, what has actually made the decision.
They have changed it to, I don't think it's a blanket rule. I think it's for some players will have the opportunity to still be in Silver Ferns even if they're playing overseas. So obviously the discussion started in regards to, are we going to get an influx of more imports coming into SSN? We saw a very interesting exchange of opinions between the pivot ladies after yesterday's game. And you can definitely see that of different opinions on that. There are a lot of different options in regards to whether we should have a cap. There's a cap in basketball. I think previously there was a cap on imports. In the English League, I believe someone said they have a cap on an import per third, which is also an option to implement. I think the main arguments are the camp that say having the imports makes SSN better. And then you have the camp that say we should cap because it's removing the pathway options for future diamonds. And we're seeing that play out now with a complete limit of experienced shooters. What Bianca Chatfield talked about, which was very interesting, was she wants the reserves competition to essentially extend to the length of SSN and become that additional pathway for diamond selection. I just want to say that there are pros and cons to every part. There is none of these answers or options are the golden answer. It's a matter of which, like, pick your poison. There is a downside to each of these. Which downside are you willing to live with the best? So if we have no cap on imports, then which is what we have now, then absolutely we are going to have an issue with not enough opportunities for Australian juniors coming through the pathways. That is just fact. More opportunities get given to imports, less opportunities for Australian pathways. Simple maths, right? And correct me if I'm wrong, Jenna, what do you think? I think that if we're comparing SSN to New Zealand, England, South Africa, right? Even if we were to take all of the imports out, SSN is still technically the best competition in the world because they have the money. We have the resources. If we have all of the best imports in SSN, does that mean that we essentially are handicapping the other leagues from getting better? There's pros and cons to that. The individual players are obviously learning a lot. They're being pushed, but at what cost for, I guess, their national team? What Bianca was talking about, and I did have to really think about this because at first I didn't really understand what she was kind of getting at, but I think what she was essentially saying is that we should create the reserves to essentially be, I guess, in line with becoming our national league. And because SSN is essentially, if we have no caps and imports, it's not the Australian league, it's an international netball league.
It's not an Australian league, like it's not just Australian only competition, it is an international competition. So of course there is an expectation to have imports in it. I do agree that they need to make the reserves competition more competitive as well. The West Coast Fever reserves actually went undefeated for the whole season this year. They won a grand final and then didn't even get a medal or a trophy for it. So I feel like that could be a good avenue if we made that a more higher stake competition in line with SSN. But we need to remember SSN isn't just a domestic league. It is an international league.
So on that subject, like someone left an interesting comment in regards to using reserves as an avenue for diamonds is like, I guess the competition isn't as hard, obviously in reserves. So is that like a fair pathway for diamond selection? And I guess the other comments was about the finance side of it and whether it's financially possible.
I think in a way, having a more competitive reserves competition will be better for the young ones coming through because they will be at that level. Because we do see people that shine in reserves and they come to SSN and then they just don't seem to quite hit the mark.
So next week's episode will come out as normal after Jenna and I return to Perth after seeing the grand final in Melbourne. Please give us a 5-star rating if you enjoyed this episode, and we will see you after the grand final.